It is October 23rd, 2024, and I'm in the birthplace of my brother, Roanoke, Virginia. And I'm here to see Jessie van Eerden. Now, make no mistake about it, Jessie van Eerden is a West Virginia author to me. Her name belongs on the Preston County, West Virginia Wikipedia page under notable people. That needs to happen. I don't know if I'm allowed to make that happen. I don't know how Wikipedia works anymore. But that's where her name belongs. And if you don't believe me, consider this. This is how I found out about Jessie van Eerden. So back in the spring, I was just doing my job at City Lights Bookstore in Sylva, North Carolina. Come see us. And I looked to my left when I'm standing at the front by the computer, and I did a double take. And I was like, is that Ann Pancake? And so I looked again, and it was like, yeah, that's Ann Pancake in our store right now. So I was really excited about that, but I wasn't going to let the opportunity pass me by. So I saw Ann go back into the regional room in the back of our store, and I did follow her. I'll admit that. I followed her because I thought that was the best place to make an ambush and tell her how much I love her writing. So that's exactly what I did. I said, "Are you Ann Pancake?" She's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Wow, I love your writing. I'm so glad you're here. Let's be friends." And was chatting with Ann for a little bit, got her email, and we started sending messages about various things over email. And one of those messages was Ann imploring us at City Lights Bookstore to carry 3 or 4 different West Virginia authors that we either didn't have or might not have on the shelves. And one of those names was Jessie van Eerden. And the book was Call It Horses, that she mentioned specifically. So again, a rule is if a writer as legendary as Ann Pancake recommends a book to you or an author to you, you read the damn thing. There's no question about it. So that's what I did. I got Call It Horses, and by the end of that book, I was like, dang, this is one of the most impactful books I'll ever read in my life. And I absolutely wanted more. And so I got more. I got all of Jessie's books, and I read them over the course of a couple of months. And by the end of it, I really, really believed this. It does not matter if enough other people read Jessie van Eerden. In my heart, always, her books are American classics. We're living amongst one of the greatest writers, not just known to West Virginia, but known to this globe. And that's really exciting. And I cannot thank Ann enough for doing such a little thing, like telling me about Jessie in an email, and it having such a huge impact on my life. And I'm so happy that I get to meet Jessie and share stories with Jessie, talk about books. I love Jessie's writing because she has not compromised on the things that makes her really special. She's just as good of an essay writer as she is a novelist, and that's because she stays true to self. I don't know that I'm ever going to get comfortable with the frequency and strangeness in which she writes about the Bible, but I don't think I want to, because that's what I like about it. It's really weird, and every time you enter a Jessie van Eerden story, you're getting something you haven't gotten before, and there's no replacing that. And so I'm so glad that she stayed true to self, that in all of her writing, she considers where she's come from. And that little tiny dot on the map in West Virginia feels so big and so powerful. And she never forgets that that's where she's from. And that makes her writing so special. And the feelings inside of her stories, you can tell, come from that epigenetic attachment to the Wet Cell Settlement in West Virginia. So I don't get to interview Jessie in West Virginia, but that's okay, because we're going to talk a lot about it. And even better, for all of us involved here, Jessie's coming out with a new book in November. This interview is going to drop the same week that her book drops on November 19th. This is going to come out on that Friday. And she's coming to do a reading at Western Carolina University to celebrate the release of that book. It's called Yoke and Feather. It's another essays book. It's going to rock your world. You're never going to forget it. I really hope you buy it. We need to support authors like Jessie in the same way we need to support authors like Ann. And I'm so glad they're supporting each other in the ways that they do. We're so lucky in Appalachia to have so many wonderful authors concentrated in a small part of the country. And I really hope you read Jessie's new book. Hit me up if you got my cell or email. Call City Lights Bookstore. I'll send you one anywhere in the world, because Jessie is the best of Appalachian writing. And her stories, and so many others that have written about Appalachia in a real way, need to be shared. And I think people will start to understand why I love Appalachia so much and why I moved here and continue to promote these authors. So yeah, I'm so excited about this, as you can tell. I'll be at Jessie's place in just a few minutes. It's like Master Ace says, the anticipation is like standing on the corner in the cold and you can see the bus. That's how I feel right now. It's going to be so exciting to see the reveal of the books on the bed that Jessie chooses, and to have another great conversation with another one of my favorite authors in the world. I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you in there. You're listening to Books on the Bed, where I travel through the country asking our hosts, if I came to your town and stayed at your house, what books would you put on my bed? Each host will share 6 books for me to carry with me on the journey of my life. And I'm here to share those books with you. As we go, we're building a digital library with every book put on every bed across the country. And who knows, maybe someday, the world. We are trying to share as many diverse stories as possible to part a curtain between us and bring us closer to each other. We hope these books and conversations make a meaningful difference in your life. Thank you for listening and being with us on this journey. After I started reading, I was Call It Horses First, which was not the most religious. It's not overtly religious. But as I went back and then read Glory Bound and The Long Weeping, I was like,
oh, wow, you really read it all.
I did read it all. I've read everything you wrote. And I was so glad that you didn't allow whatever judgments could come your way with, and then withhold the spirituality. Because, and in Glory Bound, it was the one that I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to feel about this. But then the further I got, and it was kind of the same thing with The Long Weeping. By the time I got to the last essay, which was definitely the most strange for me.
It's really weird.
I loved it. You know, I think it made me realize I was lacking any spirituality in my reading.
Interesting.
Even Appalachian writers that write about religion, they don't do it like you do. You know, so I've really enjoyed that. And it made me think like, dang, should I go back and read the Bible? Because you turn everything in the Bible into something really remarkable. And I just guess I forget how interesting the Bible can be.
Culture for you.
Yeah. When you
deadens it. It's a weird book.
Right. It's like everything I read, I was like, oh, I forgot about that story.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think the curiosity in me was piqued, but I can't say enough good things about your writing.
Oh, man.
I know when Ann Pancake says, hey, Jessie's a hell of a writer, that is a very, very...
That's her banana bread recipe.
Oh, yeah? Of course it is. I can't wait to go see her.
I was so sad she was sick before.
I know. And then I couldn't see you. And that's the other thing is like, I always go to people's childhood homes.
I would love for that to happen.
I was like, okay, even if I'm not going to interview you, I'm going to go. Is it Wetzel or Wetzel?
You should go to the Wetzel settlement.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to just look around.
I only had it on the map, and I was so interested in going there because it's such a big part of your writing. And then Beatty Church, I was just like, you were in choir in church?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
there's plumbing there now. There wasn't plumbing when I was growing up.
There we go.
But it still has the sign. It's still open. Not a lot of people there. But Ann's place is also a historic of Arthur Dale home. I don't know if you know the story of Arthur Dale. She can tell you more about it. But
where she lives now?
Where she lives now. She grew up in Romney, but Reidsville and Arthur Dale was Eleanor Roosevelt was part of founding that community.
Oh.
And it was kind of an experiment, like a social experiment. And so these were homes, I forget the name of the mining community, but it was impoverished and they built these homes. And her home is one of the original structures, and it's really beautiful.
I think I told you when we first talked, I met her in City Lights. I was like, she was looking, and I was like, is that Aunt Pancake? Oh, okay.
She has such notable hair.
I was like,
beautiful.
I was like, I'm going to go over and say hi and say, hey, I love your writing. Please be my friend.
Aww.
And then she emailed me when she got home after the Lit Fest and was like, you need to have Jessie,
Oh,
Glenn
that's so
Taylor
cool.
on your shelves.
Oh, Glenn.
And so she gave you that compliment, which is high praise. So that's why I went and just read all of your books.
Well, she's underappreciated. I mean, I still teach Given Ground, her first book. She's like,
so good.
She's like,
So
that book feels like really adolescent to me. But it's one of the best ones to teach for students who are like in this weird place between like linked story collections and disparate stories, because I think it has this really interesting middle ground where the liaisons between stories are not exactly like Olive Kitteridge or, you know, something that's highly novelistic, but the linkages are like on the subterranean level.
Which is what makes it so great.
Especially right now, it's a little eerie because it's so flood, you know,
Totally.
through and through.
So
but every time I teach her, people are like, who is this woman?
Thank you. When I first read Anne, I was like, I feel offended that nobody tells me about people. And I felt the same way about you. I mean, I would say like over the last few years, you and Anne have become two of my favorite writers of all time.
That's very kind.
There are very few writers that can grip me like you do. And it's on the sentence level. And I'm not a writer. So it's not necessarily the technicality of the sentences, though I can see how you can be skilled at writing a sentence. But often throughout your books, I have to stop like every 5 sentences. And I'm like, how could someone write such a beautiful sentence?
Oh, wow.
I love it. And that's how I am with Anne too. And I was thinking about this. So I told you, I think, that you give me the same depth of feeling as Willa Cather. And December Night from Death Comes for the Archbishop, they did like a special chapter book of just that my brother got me for Christmas a few years ago. So it's in this like special bound book, just that chapter. And it's really beautiful. And from Anne's book, Strange as This Weather Has Been, I would say if I could take anything and do that as just a chapter book, it would be the Mogi chapter.
Remind me what that
where
one
he
is.
talks about
Is it the hunting one?
the higher hum.
Higher hum.
Yeah. So
About deer
it's his only chapter in the whole book.
I love that section.
But it starts with why he goes to the woods.
Yeah.
And that when he could feel the deer before he could see or before he could hear them or see them. And that, like, honestly, my alternative title for it is Higher Hum, the higher hum, because that's what he says. It's a higher hum.
Yeah.
That to me is like a sermon, you know?
And so I can read that actually.
That would be another one. And then your mother's chapter from The Long Weeping.
Oh, Good Day.
If I could
I
turn
love that
that
one.
into a single chapter book, I've thought about that so much
That's so cool.
since I read it. But before we get like really going,
Oh yeah, sorry.
because
What is this?
your books have meant so much to me this year,
Aw.
and this means so much to me to be here with you talking
I should be
about
thanking
books.
you.
Well, I got you a gift,
Wow.
and so you can open it.
Okay.
The reason it's wrapped in one is I usually give 2 gifts, and these are 2, but they're tied
Okay.
together.
Okay. Very cool.
This is the first time I've done this,
beautiful
but
paper.
yeah.
Okay.
And if you've read it, then I will get you backups and send them.
Wright Morris, I don't know this book. Tell me about Wright.
So when I was with Charlie Baxter in Minneapolis a few months ago,
Who I really
we were talking
respect.
about Willa Cather and other kinds of Midwest writers, and he said, you need to read Wright Morris, Fire Sermon.
Okay.
I'd never heard of Wright Morris before. So there was the Nebraska connection, but also he's a photographer, like a very good photographer.
Okay.
And so I thought about your focus on portrait and how these are really just portraits of a life. And what's great, especially with the road trip component, they go from California to Nebraska,
Oh, cool.
but it ends in New Mexico.
What? That's chilling.
So there's all of these.
That's this one.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's about the same protagonist.
Oh, wow.
So it's a 2-part. You read
Super
Fire
cool.
Sermon first and then A Life. And I just feel like
Oh,
you and Wright are on the same
ew.
wavelength.
Thank you so much.
Do
you think that Jamie Quattro's Fire Sermon is a tribute to him?
I don't know.
Do you know her?
I
stuff?
just heard about Jamie from the Mississippi Book Festival.
Okay.
She was there and I'd never read it.
Well,
I
she
still
has
haven't read
that
her.
new
So.
book out,
Right.
But I've only read her original stories. But when Fire Sermon came out, I think it's called Fire Sermon.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Right? It's
Maybe it is a tribute, but all I know is I just feel like
Oh wow! Thank you.
I feel like you're really going to love the simplicity of Wright Morris, and I think the older I
Is
get,
that like a pentagram? Or is it a bridge? What is this picture of?
I guess I didn't
It looks
examine
like
it close enough.
it looks like a structure, like a bridge structure, maybe, and a mountain there. Anyway,
Yeah,
I got a little fixated. I love how lean it is.
I
I'm really
know.
trying to write lean these days.
Yep.
So.
And I think I like writers who can accomplish what these books accomplish with how lean and simple they are, because I am the opposite in my mind in everything I do. I cannot do anything simply. I can't just say something simply. I can't write something simply. And so to be able to read something like that, it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It will go right in my "this is what I'm reading" pile.
I hope so. I think you'll love it. And maybe you could teach it someday too.
Oh, I would love to.
I'd never really considered portrait essays. Like I hadn't read anything that was specifically.
I think I kind of made it up, but you
I love
see it
it.
every once in a while now in like CNF craft books or something. And it'll kind of it's done a lot more than anything. They're called profiles or, that kind of thing, like in the New Yorker. But what I loved about putting that together was the form gave me some cohesion.
Oh my gosh. This is one of my favorite essay books ever. You are really, I think you said it once, you're at home writing essays. And I think that's true. You are so good at it. It is just like, again, who are you? Why have you not been in my life longer? Why can't I be a millionaire and fund all of your essay books? Seriously, I've told so many people about Even Yolk and Feather coming out because it feels like you could write a million of these books and I would never, ever get bored of them.
Well, you know what's funny about the one about my mom is we had a really long history with that essay because I wanted her to feel okay about me publishing it. And so she went through a big series of first she was like, it's way too much attention paid to me. She was horrified. And then the next time she read it, she was like, well, as long as no one else reads it. I was like, that's the point of publishing something, Mom. But then eventually she got to this place where she said, I kind of feel like you see me, which was really meaningful to me because it's treacherous ground to write about someone else. And she just like, she felt like I was watching, which was eerie to her at first. But then I think she felt like she was known in a way. And so that linked, something with us, not lynched, but linked something to us that I know that there's a lot about my life she does not understand, like that I'm not married with 10 children, for instance. Yeah. I'm a college professor and whatnot. But I know she deeply has the respect for my writing, that it comes from a place that sees her and respects her, even though our lives are so different.
That whole essay felt like an understanding.
Really?
I mean,
That's so
I
encouraging.
felt so connected to your mother. And I love...
Such a neat person.
Yeah, I really loved that you highlighted her because as a writer, you are really good at taking ordinary people and helping us. I think you said once, writing is not to humanize. It is to bring out the humanity that's already there.
Yeah.
And I think someone like your mother, who would ever see all of that movement? Who would ever know the depth of someone like your mother that you could say, has a small life in West Virginia? It's not extraordinary. But to me, that's what made the thing so powerful is clearly you saw her. I mean, gosh, the intimacy of that story was chilling and beautiful. And I just, it was one that I hope to just keep going back to, because I even think I've thought a lot about labor and or just worship and work and how much those are tied. Yeah. And so that chapter, I think, highlighted for me
core theme in that chapter.
One day is
1,000 years is one day.
Yeah, 1,000 years is one day, and one day is 1,000 years. But yeah, I really, really loved that one, and I'm glad you brought it up. And since I don't get to go to the Wetzel settlement before this, we're going to go there today.
Okay.
But I want to frame it up with clouds. And the first that relates to your mother is the cloud of witnesses. That chapter in The Long Weeping also really got me because you talk about the women from your mountain childhood and this idea of a cloud of witnesses and people that are there with you all the time as you're writing. So I want to start there, going back to West Virginia in your childhood, because it's so prevalent in everything you do, and how that cloud of witnesses stays with you and informs your writing, even in this new book, clearly Yolk and Feather?
It's such an interesting question for the task at hand at choosing 6 books, which was impossible, by the way.
Yeah.
Because that is a cloud of witnesses too.
Yeah.
And so all of the pieces, I think what drove me to write that cloud of witnesses essay was I could not get my first novel published. And I was so disheartened. And I was very, I'd started a new novel because I was like, I'll just put my energy into something new. But I think it also raised questions like, well, who am I writing for? Why am I writing? What is the end game here? So I really started thinking, like, who do I want to be most true to? And the people that came up in my mind were the people I think who first fired my imagination, And I did feel like it does continue in the second essay collection of people who taught me how to love in ways that would sustain me for the rest of my life, And they're totally imperfect people. These are not people to be idealized or put on pedestals in any way, but especially the women. I grew up in a unique community just because I had a lot of elderly around me. So, and sadly, that means I saw a lot of people die really young who I wish the world could have longer. But it made me, I kind of grew up about 2 decades behind my peers in some ways. But I wouldn't trade that for anything because I felt like, I got to be a witness to something that wasn't going to be around much longer, And I don't mean that the community isn't still vibrant with new families, and I'm not idealizing nostalgia, but I do feel like my world was very small in many ways, but felt so huge, even when I was a child, even when I felt like I want Reeboks, I want to know the cooler bands and stuff like that. I want to be in touch with the outside world, but I had felt like within, the small world we had, I think I learned how time and the day and the smallness of spaces is just exploding with life if you look. And that's still, I'm still writing about that theme. It still gives me chills, because I think therein lies the secret of some kind of peace and joy in your life, kind of no matter what.
Yeah. That's very Weltian, that idea that all of these small places are exploding with life. And I think one of the reasons I take back roads and constantly stop in obscure places is I can't get enough of that.
Yeah.
Not because I want to do anything with it. I just want to feel it. I want to be around it. Yeah. And I love going to a place that is just bursting with color and vibrance and humanity that I'd never been to. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like every time it's a good reminder of exactly what you're saying.
Well, I think especially because everything is so flattened now. Once Appalachia got stamped as Trump country, there's this like a flat line of who people are, what they prioritize, how racist they are, how small-minded they are, and then this weird thing happens where, to overcorrect, there's a complete idealization of small town, of small places, and that serves another kind of unnerving project. So it's like continually dismissal. Who said that? Dorothy Day said that. Like that you're if you call me a saint, it's the worst kind of dismissal, that's a sanitization. And it's also, to overlook and to oversimplify and be reductive. Yeah. So it's a complicated game to, I think, revere the deeply human and complexity in people. It's not, there's not one strategy there,
I love what you're talking about, small parts of the world, and you writing it. I highlighted this quote because it sums up you to a T, at least in how I think about you. And I don't remember what interview you did this in, but you said, in second grade, I had a diary that locked with a sleeping kitten on the cover, in which I took notes on the book of Revelation. In college, after I read Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, my journals were addressed to AD, or sometimes to God, or sometimes to myself, but that seemed a riskier addressee. I wrote a lot of letters, and still do, something from your mother, obviously. Yeah. As a child, I had a pen pal from Finland, Maria, who sent me finished paper dolls and cut out flowers and enlarged my world. I didn't live outside of West Virginia until I graduated college. So missives from the world, from people I kind of knew, like Maria, and people in books were how I came to know things beyond my own boundaries. This is the line. Writing things myself seemed the best way to participate in the memorialization of small parts of the world. So I'm curious how that memorialization motivates you to continue writing the way you do about West Virginia and that cloud of witnesses that you've had since you were a child. Like, why is that so important to you? And how does it help you overcome the doubt? I think in the Long Weeping, where you mentioned the abstract others that aren't your, well, I guess they are a cloud of witnesses, but like the academy and publishing with a capital P. So I'm curious about how that memorialization helps you fend off the judgment from those more abstract people that say you need to write about something else.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, memorialization to me is a counterpoint to using things as currency. So I think we're in an age, particularly in the literary world, where we're kind of pressured to use as currency whatever quirks we have or whatever memberships or tribes we're part of, whether it's, being from Appalachia, whether it's being a gay writer, whether it's being of a particular ethnicity, like you're kind of representing something. And that comes with it a whole bunch of pressure and a whole bunch of expectation and kind of the encouragement to make it saleable. And I think that cheapens the work. I think that kind of pressure, it makes it flatter and it makes it so that you're constantly reading from the outside of yourself of how will you be seen? How will you be received? It makes it, you walk on eggshells, I think. But memorialization, I think, is the deeper work that is still kind of true to those quirks probably and to sort of what things you want to highlight that maybe are less noticed in the mainstream world. But I do feel like there is maybe something at its core that is self-effacing or is trying to get at something that's not nostalgia necessarily or stuck in the past or stuck in retreading on the old all the time. But like take the Bible, for instance. I mean, my gosh, I write about the Bible all the time. It's an old book. The stories are old. The stories are familiar. The stories are known. It's an open and shut case. The stories have done so much damage to so many people culturally. So why on earth do I still return? And that return to me, is a kind of memorialization, which I think is an ever making new at the same time. Like, what can I pull up and look at and examine for something that is new in this old thing, which then shows me something new in the present. It's always a kind of, what do you call that? Bivalent endeavor. So that I'm never just, I'm not wired up to be a theologian. I'm not someone who's interested in saying this is even a doctrine that I believe, but I am really interested in formative stories that just are constantly living as this parallel stream that are kind of a mirror and a waterway, for me as a contemporary person in 21st America on the cusp of a hard election. Teaching in academia, we're going through academic renewal, like all of these things that are like things that are now have a kind of deeper hum, to use your word from earlier, Anne Pancake's word. Love you, Anne. That just simply makes life less cheap.
I knew we would connect because I think the thing that bothers me, and I always I have feelings to myself that are really negative. One is almost everybody does the cheap thing. For expediency, whatever is going to get to the end result as quickly as possible without really sacrificing anything. And a lot of things are not thoughtful because of that. Mm-hmm. And that's in art, writing, podcasting, whatever it is, music. And I think we've lost the in-between that makes things not cheap. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons your mother's essay stuck out is because you really, really go deep on this idea that not everything we do is a means to an end. That the process itself of a day, that is it. Every day is the Lord's day. And I think it was a reminder I really needed that in a cheap world, it's really actually quite revolutionary to have that level of immersion in a day or in a task, and especially with labor. And so I'm curious how your mother's daily habits, even from writing, and I loved the parallel between the chapter with your mother starting on a Dollar General
I didn't think
and
about
call it
that.
horses.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Right.
That's how you start there. Your mother starts.
That was not overt, but that's true.
But the idea of letter writing, I was just talking about this with a friend in Franklin. Who does it? Well, they say, well, why would you? You can just text. See what I'm saying? Like you cheapen something because, you can just do the faster thing. But I'm curious how your mother's life informs both your writing and your own living to avoid being cheap and instead have that real immersion with something.
Well, it's amazing to think about that essay now because she is yet again a caregiver of her mom. Oh. So she once again has someone that she's caring for in the home. And that's a lot of years of caregiving that she has given herself to. And it's invisible. I mean, and so are the home health workers that come and the hospice workers. It's the most invisible labor we probably have as a nation. And most of it's female and most of it's women of color. But I feel like I feel like my mom, this kind of comes out in A Good Day a little bit, that she, a lot of times in her syntactical constructions in her letters reflects a kind of penetration of her days with the sacred. So I think this is an essay, but it may not be, but I remember really distinctly, she's walking back from the chicken house, her sister's on the phone, my Aunt Kathy, who called often, and I'm like, Mom, and Kathy's on the phone and she's in the middle of a conversation. And I was like, with God, she's like, hang on. And she's got her, boots with chicken around them. And I think to this day, I think I just recently wrote her a postcard, like any kind of artwork I do in my life, I think is about seeing the sacred and the ordinary being part of the work of the world and having that shine from the inside out. And that's just always going to be attributed to how she behaves in the world, whether or not she's always naming it that, But I recently was looking at some quilts that she made. She used to quilt a lot before she got pretty busy with my grandmother, and she will again. But the piecing together of things and the making of art was always a part of her, whether or not, we had the most elite literary text in the house. I got to learn an elite kind of artistry in that home.
Yeah, I love that through line in many of these Books on the Bed episodes. I was talking with Glennis Redmond in South Carolina. She had one of her great grandmothers, or maybe it was just her grandmother's quilt right behind me, off the couch. And she was pointing this out to say that, you're accountable to your people. And when she was talking about her accountability to the women in her life and the people that were not seen as artists, and yet so many things they did day after day were innovative and artistic and revolutionary. And like that quilt being one example of something that someone wouldn't know about her family. And I think she used the phrase, I want to make their lives count. And I really love that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And I love how many writers take that seriously. I wish more did. But there was you mentioned something about light. And there was one passage that I need to find. Yes, here it is. And her hair, she touches it, apologizes always for its mess and its lack of shape, but then she threads her fingers through it with secret pleasure, for she's never wanted hair she could pick out of a catalog. She thinks things are clearer when your hair begs a dollop of styling gel, just as they're clearer when you've got under $20 in a checkbook and even less in a wallet, but your jeans are nice and snug, line dried, and the fall air chills your hands till they sting red with the work you have to do today. She throws herself full force into work alongside Dad, burning brush, covering the chicken house windows with plastic for the winter, liming the garden, ousting the new potatoes. But doing the work is not for the purpose of arriving, finished, ready for a prize and a rose pinning. It's immersion. It's work that's meant to create a place inside the day for others to come into, come evening, to sit. And that evening light, radiating from the hues of the work itself, will slant onto the porch where the others will sit, and their faces will glow pink and gorgeous. A day, a life, is not a means to an end. What do I think is urgent for her today? That we do not, will not, die alone. That one gets me.
Yeah, me too.
Oh. It's just so beautiful. It's work that's meant to create a place inside the day for others to come into. I've thought about that line so much. I just think your mother's story is one of living a life that isn't for reward. Not externally, not everybody patting you on the back and congratulating you. And there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah. Mom, thank you for recognizing that. Maybe Mom will hear that. Hear that, Mom? If she listens to this.
I hope so. And I know, sometimes people are probably like, why are you fixating on this? But to me, that felt like such an important essay among all of yours. And I think there's a through line even to Yoke and Feather and Call It Horses where your mother is in all of that.
Yeah, she is. She's a strong
both because of the faith component, the religious component, and your interest in that. But I think you're a writer who takes seriously that writing is not a means to an end. And that is starting to get really hard to find. And for those of you that still do it, like you and Anne, I will always celebrate your work because it's just, I love it. I love that you can tell it's not for the reward. So anyway, not to make you emotional.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now I'm crying.
But I want to talk about Yoke and Feather, and it's coming out
November 19th.
and
With the Thank book. So
I know, which, I've read this, and as I said, I've shared it with so many people to have on the lookout so that they can get it. I'm going to mail it out for Christmas for quite a few people. But I want to talk about you go years back with the concept and the title for this book. What about the Yoke and Feather brought this book together, and how do these essays play with that title? Those
words birthed this collection, I think, in a few different ways. I think in one way, feathers started appearing. So that was kind of an unconscious thing, just an image that in the first essay, there's sort of like the concept of blessing is something that goes throughout the book, and prayer as blessing, and feathers as, inconsequential, blessing being a kind of, I think I say, ineffectual prayer. That's kind of, it's not the point to call down an interventionist presence, but more to go deeply into your life. So feathers in their uselessness. Of course, they're useful in flying, and they're useful in keeping you warm in a down coat. But on their own, when you find one on the forest floor, I have a bunch of them right up there. Actually, I just keep them.
It's funny. I have them on my windowsill.
Yeah, I have a tail feather of a heron my partner Thorpe gave me, and those are. So they're treasures. And so part of that's so I'm such a keeper. I keep rocks and stones and everything, these keepsakes, little altars everywhere, so to speak. So I think, that was part of it. And then I think pretty early on, I was really interested in not even the etymology, but all the manifestations of the word yoke. So of course the oxen yoke and the yoke of slavery, the yoke of burden, the yoke of labor, being yoked to these bodies that are mortal, but also in the more kind of feminine world, yoke of a dress and a place where things meet, a metaphor being yoked, vehicle to tenor, so things that kind of togetherness. And so those images of lightness and weight. And of course, Simone Weil, patron saint, Gravity and Grace is one of my favorite books of hers.
Yeah,
I didn't pick it because
I was going to say, do you not have Simone?
Only because like she's
you might not be more obsessed with anything other, like the Bible, maybe.
I think it's also like she's also like someone I don't really recommend in some ways.
Yeah,
which is a weird thing to say. She's someone who is huge for me.
Yeah, you mention her a lot.
But also, when I was thinking, I don't know, I was thinking of books on the bed, like in terms of
maybe
like,
not the
slightly lighter reading. I don't know.
Yeah, what would someone think of you if you put
maybe I was trying to
Gravity and Grace
for
in
the
there.
I was trying to surprise you, which I probably didn't even do. But yeah, Gravity and Grace is of course one of my books, and all of her writing, and she's super complicated. I mean, she's a total weirdo and way too severe. And I try to take it up in this book, like why can't love be consolation and light? Why does that have to be oppositional? But she is someone who has always, she lives in my mind as someone who says, once you think something, think how the contrary might be true. And that is a constant action, just this restless mind that she had to not accept. Talk about someone who doesn't accept cheapness. If I'm a feminist at all, I'm a Valian feminist, like if I'm in the world politically, which I am in a very awkward way, she informs most of my political thought.
Yeah.
And she's, super complicated. And I think sometimes self-hating, I mean, she has a lot of like darkness in her work, but that idea of gravity as grace, as the downward movement of humility, of decay, of things that are not, so-called uplifting, is where true lightness lives and where grace lives. And that's just really interesting to me. And it, of course, because I'm biblically veined, and that's my blood, I am drawn to that verse when Jesus says in the gospel, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Which, interestingly, my friend Michelle, if you're listening, love you. We have studied that verse together, and she has always heard that as Jesus being the teamster, the oxen, the farmer, with the whip, saying, my yoke that I will put on you is easy. And I said, I always thought of it as he is right there with me in the other side of the yoke, and we are pulling together. So I just think that's fascinating with how we grew up imaginatively with the text, same text, So I think in some ways the book is a deep meditation on that. And I don't think I come to any answers. No. And I'm not that interested in answers.
I was talking about this Catherine Savage, who, if you haven't read her essay book, Ground Glass.
I'll put it on my list.
I'm going to get that for Anne. Well, I have it for Anne. But Catherine and I were talking about her process of years of research for this book. And not coming to any conclusion whatsoever, even though at the onset she's like, oh, I hope I do. I hope there's something that you can come away with as a reader, and then it just doesn't happen. But to me, that's what made the whole thing great. Yeah. It was because that's life. The whole journey is full of times where you think you're going to get somewhere, and then you don't. And that's not even necessarily the point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think these essays, they don't give you any conclusion, nor do I want it. Mm-hmm. Going back to that Bible verse, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There was an interview you did years ago where you said in your answer to that, well, not really.
Well, what was the question?
You said that, where some of these essays were coming from, and that you had thought about that phrase, and that your response in your head was like, well, not really.
It's not really light. It's not really. I was just thinking about that the other day with my same friend Michelle. We were reading Psalm 91, and it was like, "The Lord is my dwelling place." A rock will not smite you. The angels will suffering will not come to you. We're just like, yeah, it's not true. So what do you do with that?
Yeah,
once you hear that promise and you live with the reality of it not boding well, what do you do with that?
I don't know.
You make essays, I guess.
Maybe every time you don't get the received promise, you just write about that. Well, that's messed up.
That's why I call them messays. My friend Kim Kupperman calls them messays.
I think
messes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
You make an essay out of the mess
Mm-hmm.
because that's all this is. And I think you do a really good job of it. I actually highlighted the recurrence of the feather.
Mm-hmm.
And I love feathers. The Good Lord Bird is one of my favorite books of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And James McBride has a line that penetrated my soul that I don't really know why, but it's one feather from a good Lord bird can give you understanding that'll last your whole life, which is an ivy-billed woodpecker is the good Lord bird. And I don't know why that just stuck with me, but there's just something now feather. And I think when you sent me this book and I saw the prominence of feathers, I got really excited. But there is something in that I think is important because you talk a lot about abundance. Mm-hmm. And in the story with Martha and Mary, you say, I don't know exactly how the story ends. Can I read this?
Sure.
I don't know exactly how the story ends the following morning, except that, extinguishing my lantern, going back outside in the almost dawn, I hug the old yellow sweater to myself, but then peel it off, down to tank top and cool air, and I feel the breeze move across Martha's face. It is early. Maud prepares to leave, to go out on her own, with her stowaway caterpillars, her pristine teeth, her hemmed slip, and favorite doodles. But she and Mary cannot find Martha. It's Mary who's left to fuss over the luggage and sandwiches. Martha nowhere to be found, until Maud thinks to look out back on the bank of earth where there was that first pile. Maud is not sure why she does not look in the cellar, in the pantry, at the wash line, but she doesn't. Mary follows. And there they find Martha, stooped like a bent willow, and lies lightly rising as she gathers a fresh heap. Oh, mostly from the sawdusty henhouse beds, mostly white, such that you might think snow, except this is summer. And Martha's dress is thin. And these are feathers, and the feathers are for the girl who has come. And the feathers are for you and for me. Martha reaches to the center of the pile and unbends and unwinds herself and turns her face so softly toward Maud. For from the center of the pile she has pulled the rare indigo bunting tail feather. It is so blue unto all the light's possibility, a thing magnificent offered for nothing.
I love that moment.
I couldn't stop thinking about I read it like 10 times. You know, have you ever had that in your mind where you read something and you didn't read it as well as you liked? Like for me,
That's why I'm so slow.
This took me several weeks to read because you have a way of dead stopping me in the middle because I can't move on until I get it right. Or maybe it's just, that's my mind's way of tricking me to just go back to it so I can slow down. I think sometimes we read too fast. I do.
Yeah.
Or I try to quicken it because I think I need to be a fast reader. And I'm like, well, that's dumb. The reading isn't to get to the end. It's to read. It's to immerse yourself in the work. But talk about how that paragraph plays into the whole of this essay book, because I really feel like it says a lot there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's probably the place where I was like, okay, I know where the themes are going for this collection, which, this book came about really differently than The Long Weeping in terms of its having a little bit more of a thematic through line or something that generated a set of questions. But I do feel like that essay was so important for me to write and so fun. And I think, because it's pure fiction, of course. There is no foster girl for Mary and Martha that we know of. But I, of course, have always had those two sisters, and all women everywhere who grew up fundamentalist Christian, know all about Mary and Martha and who we were supposed to emulate and how confusing that those models were, and so airtight. So I don't like anything airtight. But what was really fun in that essay was to the fictive element. And I think one of the things I started at the end of The Long Weeping was to interrogate biblical texts in more of the midrashic style and thinking about them as stories with so many gaps. And so I kind of went hog wild in this collection with that, with lots of stories. And this one in particular, there's a playfulness in it for me, but I think also a lifeline in getting something truer in the story that is so scant. And these characters have years and years and centuries of church history build up around them that doesn't get to their real story and their flesh and like their innards, and who they were as people. So the feather, who knows where it came from, but
but it's everywhere.
But it's everywhere, and
we are finding feathers.
And it's also, it is a nothing, I mean, when you find a feather, it's disjointed from its purpose. It's not doing anything. It's useless there alone, and it's one of the most lovely things we find. We always feel so lucky, especially if it's a bird like an owl feather or something that's shaped oddly. I see a lot of turkey feathers and jay feathers and whatnot, but when my partner gave me the tail feather of a heron, I mean, that's such a delicate, elegant shape. And it's a piece that is, of course, so connected to the whole that is missing. And so this kind of like, the togetherness and the singularity is another theme from the book. I think community and individuality.
I think the Bible would be on the bedside table. Am I wrong? If I stayed here, I think
that's
it would.
Boring. I didn't choose that one.
I think it would have. I think it would have to be though. Like at least in the drawer, like in a hotel.
It's one of the Gideon Bibles.
I don't know that a Bible couldn't be in the room, given how much you write about it. Truly, you are weird in that way.
I'm so weird in that way.
In the best way possible.
Really
I do not know any other contemporary writers that write so deeply and so strangely about the Bible as you do. I just don't.
Well, I am so grateful to Dzank for publishing this book because it's super weird. There's a lot of Jesus. There's a lot of Bible. And at the same time, it's not a Christian book. I mean, it's not a book that's going to be published by InterVarsity Press or is oriented toward doctrine. And I'm not poo-pooing religious presses. I'm just saying it's not necessarily, it doesn't belong there.
No.
But interestingly, a little anecdote is I had a house sitter once, and my dog, bless her heart, who is no longer with me, she ate my books. She ate my books. At one time, I had a dog sitter she literally ate my books. Sometimes the ones I was teaching. And I love Mona, but she was a devil in that way. And she ate my Bible. And my house sitter was horrified. She's like, your Bible is in shreds.
Oh my God.
But I really like that little Bible. It's an English Standard Version. So I got one on Amazon that someone else has written in. So the Bible I now have doesn't even really belong to me in the deeper sense, which I think is somehow symbolic of something. I don't know what.
Probably. You got to write an essay about it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't like the insights that the woman writes in the margin are really interesting.
Wow.
Should we get to the books?
Yes, we absolutely should. Yeah, let's start with. You can pick with whatever one you want.
A good segue is maybe this first Honkin book, which is really
that is a big one.
Big, but it's not to seem erudite. It's like 400 pages, but it took me probably 3 years to read. So it's one of those kinds of books.
Oh my.
So this is Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg's book, The Murmuring Deep, Reflections on the Biblical Unconscious.
Of course.
And I had to choose this one, not because it is easy reading in any way, but it's fireworks in the head when you read it. So she's someone who, I think she's just an amazing mind. She's deeply invested in the biblical text and in the Midrashic enterprise and all of the stories that are inside of stories. But she is highly literary, and she's always bringing in poets. And this particular book, she brings in a lot of psychoanalysis too, which is super fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's a book that's kind of too smart for me, and I like reading books that's like playing tennis with someone who's better than you.
Yeah.
You know, you end up playing a little better.
Uh-huh.
So I think the book has kind of made me just a little bit smarter. But it also just so beautifully took a story that you thought you knew, and she was like, let's look at it this angle and this angle. And of course, this principle of doing that isn't just for biblical text. It's any kind of thing that you presuppose or think you understand. Like, let's check our arrogance at the door and realize all that we do not know about a story or another human. And I wanted to read this one passage if I can.
Yes.
And this is where she starts talking about the Midrashic kind of the classic work on the text. And it starts actually with prayer, with the story of Isaac. And so the transformative energy of prayer can move God from anger to mercy. The pitchfork tosses the grain sheaves, changing their position and place. The act of turning, inverting, is revolutionary. It reveals what is hidden. The word atar, a pitchfork, is also the term for a plow, which turns over the sods of earth to create a newly fertile surface. The motion of pitchfork or plow tears open, enters darkness to bring to light something that has been buried. The prayer of the righteous, the Midrash claims, has this transfigurative effect. But it is specifically Isaac's prayer that works through the resonances of the pun via etar, plead, pitchfork, to suggest a descent into darkness, an upheaval that inverts the previous order. Similarly, the notion of turning is central to a classic midrash on the study of Torah. Turn it over and over, for all is in it. Precisely because it contains all, the Torah requires this kind of transfigurative study. The plow exposes new surfaces of earth to the light, and the student reveals unexpected or long-buried facets of meaning. So the whole book is like this, 400 pages of this mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, you got to take your time with it.
You really have to take your time. And she really, she was so stimulating to read and still is. And I hope to meet her one day.
Wow.
But even that title, the murmuring deep, the murmuring underneath,
I love that title. Yeah.
It's kind of says everything about what's possible about your formative stories, whether they're biblical, whether they're Greek myth, whether they're fairy tale. I mean, all of us have stories that have formed us. And I just find them endlessly fresh and exciting.
When did you first find this book?
I even wrote it. Actually, it says November 2011, ? But I wrote down how long it took me to read it through January 2015. So that's like four and a half years or 3.5 years. And I have John Linton, my dear friend in Oregon, to thank for it. He's a biblical scholar and brought me to her. And he also was like, just read it piece by piece.
I love how you're getting gifts from biblical scholars. That's so on point for you.
Well, he's a dear friend and just a really biblical scholar in all the most unorthodox ways possible. He and his wife, Nancy Lang.
Has to be.
Yeah.
Wait, is this the Nancy from, was this in Oregon?
It was in Oregon. Yeah, Nancy
Your neighbor?
Langton. Yeah. She's in one of my essays, I think.
Yeah, you were contemplating Simone with her.
Definitely.
And struggling with...
She basically introduced me to Simone Weil. Yeah, and she also helped me through my divorce, and is still a dear friend. She's a spiritual director, and I still she doesn't direct me, but she does.
Yeah,
but we still talk on the phone as every few months.
I love that.
But she also, John, I dedicated the Rizpah essay to John, and he introduced me to her story and the idea of what does it mean. What does it mean to lie down next to death? And so he just introduced me to all kinds of weird ways to meditate on grief. And again, her story has 2 verses in the whole text. So
Long Weeping was 2017?
That came out in 2017, yes.
I remember reading something from 2012 where you were contemplating the Rizpah story.
Oh, really?
It was on some journal online.
Huh.
And you said that you were really interested in smaller projects.
You did a deep dive here.
Judy, is it Judy Dawn?
Judy Dawn, yeah. She became Frankie. Yeah, and Call
This was
Horses.
from 2012. I'm drafting a narrative
That's
poetry
how long that
sequence.
book took.
That's what I'm saying.
That's how it started.
Yeah, you were drafting a narrative poetry sequence with a central figure, Judy Dawn, which becomes Frankie in Call It Horses. And because you said that went through so many different iterations of the story before, being the letter, who acts as a mourner for her small community. But then I've been slowly working on an essay exploring the story of a little-known biblical character named Rizpah, one of Saul's concubines.
2012. So that was the year I got divorced. And that was the year I spent a long time with Rizpah. And that time she kept me sane, even though she's crazy. Or she validated my madness.
I think you were meant to be mad when you wrote that. It was a very bizarre...
Well, it's definitely an essay around
very bizarre essay.
Madness and grief, I think.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to unlock at least a fraction of that meaning as I enter into the story imaginatively. Live alongside death. Yeah. So you've been thinking about that for a long time. I love that connection with Nancy too, because as I read about that, I was like, oh man, I want a neighbor like Nancy. I want a spiritual guide and someone to grapple with the difficult questions of life.
Yeah,
That's beautiful.
She's a very special person to so many. She's a gift.
Cool. That's book one.
Well, maybe relatedly, I did put Par Lagerkvist on here, his Barabbas, which is a very short novel. Interestingly, when I first picked this book up, I did not like it. I was put off by it. And I think it's because of the conundrum of writing about spiritual texts and sacred texts is you can't work on borrowed emotion. You can't just redo the same thing and use it as a kind of currency. And when this book started, so it's the story of Barabbas, who was the man released to the people's desire when Jesus was going to be crucified. So they were like, you want Jesus or do you want this criminal? And they were like, free Barabbas. And then Jesus was crucified in his stead. So of course you don't know anything else about him in the biblical text. So from the outset, I think, well, this is a book I'm going to dig. But at the beginning, I didn't, because I didn't like the way it was, I don't know, kind of like too much about the crucifixion or too much about like Christian rhetoric or something until I just got deeper into it and he became more and more of a complicated figure. And he's a child of rape. He has no ability to believe. So he is sort of the quintessential faithless being kind of roaming the earth, puzzled by what he is pulled to, which is the sort of the early Christian community. But my favorite part, which connects to in this new book, Yoke and Feather, I have an essay on Lazarus and on Lazarus's resurrection, and how maybe resurrection isn't too great. Or what might be difficult about being resurrected, and just as a thought experiment. But it originated in this really bizarre section of this novel where he goes to find Lazarus, this Barabbas character, and they have this really kind of funny conversation. He says, Barabbas said that in some ways, Lazarus in the story is very dead inside. And he's like, I am a mouthpiece, basically, for the Christian cause. So I feel kind of like conscripted into that. And he says, he raised me from the dead because I am to witness for him. Barabbas said that in that case, it was only natural he should believe in him and that he must eternally be grateful to him for the great miracle he had wrought. The man said, yes, he was. He thanked him every day for having brought him back to life, for the fact he belonged to the realm of the dead no longer. The realm of the dead, Barabbas exclaimed, noticing his voice trembled slightly. The realm of the dead, what is it like there? You who have been there, tell me what it is like. What it's like, the man said, looking at him questioningly. And he eventually says, I have experienced nothing. As though, the man answered, as though disapproving of the other's violence. I have merely been dead, and death is nothing. And he later says, it's just strange you're asking me this. They don't usually. So it's just this idea of like, okay, yes, you're this sort of, symbol of this great miracle, but what was it like on the other side? You're someone who can speak to that. And so that question that doesn't get really asked in the story, in the biblical text, becomes kind of this really pretty marvelous. And it's not an easy read. I mean, it's not like, it doesn't become some kind of religious treatise or something. I mean, he goes on to have a very difficult life. And at one point he is, in iron chains to another man, and he's so used to him. They kind of spoon when they sleep, even when they're not chained, because of their familiarity with one another's bodies. Wow. So there are just images in the book that. So what I learned from it so much was like how hard you have to work if you're retreading on this same ground to plow. To what do you turn up? And I think it's a marvel.
I love that connection.
I think it's a beautiful book, and yeah, so that's another one.
Oh my gosh, starting off with two. Excellent. This is like I didn't know these, but now I'm like, yes, this is why I came here.
Yeah, I mean,
Only
it's such a
JVE
it's such a
would
fun
have
podcast
these.
idea.
Oh my gosh.
And maybe the last in that vein, I probably is an obvious one. Marilyn Robinson always has to be on my list. And I think I love the Gilead books for sure, but I think her first, Housekeeping, becomes my favorite and is a book I feel like each time I read is like sacred text and continues to open up new avenues. And one of the things about this book is the kind of overall deep midrash it does with the deluge narrative of Noah's flood and the concept of like the grandfather is in a train accident, he's in the lake, all the dead people in the water. So that, the deluge narrative is one of those of horror that despite that, we have nurseries with Noah's rainbow and, let's have 2 giraffes and 2 lizards. And isn't that cute? When it's like the most horrifying story of God's wrath that exists. So I love, that she's like ever treading in that narrative, but so subtly and in a very eerie, smoky way. But she also has I love this book for many reasons, but I think one of it is the way she uses the first person narration that is much larger than Ruth herself. She just has such a huge sort of psyche and spirit. But there's Cain and Abel, there's Noah, and one of my favorite passages is this passage, if you don't mind me reading it,
Yes.
about Lot's wife. And of course, that's, Kurt Vonnegut has written about Lot's wife. She's just one of those looking to the past kind of icons or symbols that we have in culture. But this is one of my favorite paragraphs in the book. If there had been snow, I would have made a statue, a woman to stand along the path among the trees. The children would have come close to look at her. Lot's wife was salt and barren because she was full of loss and mourning and looked back. But here, rare flowers would gleam in her hair and on her breast and in her hands, and there would be children all around her to love and marvel at her for her beauty and to laugh at her extravagant adornments, as if they had set the flowers in her hair and thrown down all the flowers at her feet, and they would forgive her eagerly and lavishly for turning away, though she never asked to be forgiven. Though her hands were ice and did not touch them, she would be more than mother to them. She so calm, so still, and they such wild and orphan things. I mean, damn. So I just feel like there's just a reverence there that I have when I read the ways Robinson just enters the world of biblical figures, because very much like Zornberg, like just nothing is open and shut. There is just always like here rare flowers bloom, and that's in her work. Rare flowers are just always blooming in a place that, for others, there's just barren country. And I just think that's I co-taught with my dear colleague and friend Tina Salloway. She's a classicist, and so we taught reimagining ancient women, and we did Greek myth, and we did biblical.
Can I take a class
stories.
with you?
That was so fun. And
I would kill to take that class.
We did it with first years, and it was maybe a bit much for first years. But we had our rare flowers, was what we called it, our final thing where they did reimagining work with a text of all different kind of sorts. And it was so fun to do that with young minds, because they're like, you can do this? It's like a permission.
Oh, because there's no thought up until that point.
No, especially with sacred texts. We think sacred texts are somehow, too sacred to touch. And in that way, they're not sacred to us at all. They become something that doesn't affect our lives whatsoever. Because they're too, they're like, you touch them and they're like poison almost,
Yeah. There becomes a distance from those stories. But when you can reimagine things, like what some of my favorite songwriters, I mean, even you'd mentioned earlier fairy tales or myths and folk tales. Have you read Julia Phillips' Bear yet?
No.
Okay. I almost got that for you.
Oh, I must.
Not because of it's biblical, but I think you would appreciate her taking an old story from, is it the Brothers Grimm story with Rose Red? And in her story, she retells that there's these two sisters on the San Juan Islands in Washington. And it's a retelling of that story where the bear comes to town and fractures their relationship. One becomes fixated and infatuated with this bear. The other one is terrified of it. But anyway, it was just such a unique reimagining of that tale, something that stuck with her for over 3 decades of her life.
Yeah.
And she just went for it. And I remember one of the gifts I gave her when I interviewed her at the Mississippi Book Festival last month was an album by a friend of mine in Minneapolis that you actually, I could have gotten that for you too, because Siri really loves the Bible. Her mother is a minister, and she wrote, a song called Eve Boards a Train. And she wrote a song called Persephone that is one of the most beautiful. But she always is looking for old tales to inform her music. And I think there's just something really cool about that.
Yeah.
So I love when anyone can.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that imagery of seeing what's underneath, something that's new, fresh. I think old stories can be told fresh and have the same impact. It doesn't have to say stale. And
I think it's also what strikes me about Robinson, it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to do a feminist retelling, like Lot's wife's hands are icy in that image. It's not a I'm going to make this consistent with my current ideology. Instead, I want to infuse dislocation and question into my current ideology because nothing is ironclad. We taught Madeline Miller's Circe, which I think is one of the best retellings. I still need to write that.
I still need to read that.
It's so gorgeous. I just wept through that. It's one of the most, and I'm not a huge fan of Greek retellings. I think it can be done really badly. And like biblical retellings, there's so many bad examples. So it's like,
yeah, it's almost as if those bad ones give a
bad,
and they inform why people might stay away from them.
Sure, because there's it's
like how much of it can you take? Yeah.
Or it's like you can't think of anything new on your own, so you're just doing. Do we need another Star Wars? Is the Mandalorian doing its own thing? I don't know, but I'm a sucker for all the Star Wars. But still, we have the Rings of Power. We have continual.
Yeah.
Is it to capitalize or is it to say something new? And that is the question.
Always that. That is always the question.
But Circe, yes, you must read. It's not on my books, but it should be. And it's also an uneasy story. She's, there's maybe something predictable in the way that there's sexual violence, and that sort of turns her into this person who would turn men into pigs. But that's not the only hinge of the book. She is herself just has so much inner conflict and is a very difficult mother. Yeah. And so I just think it's let's just make her into a real person is what the novel does. And I've heard Madeline Miller, she was so gracious and talked to our students over Zoom. Cool. And she's a really brilliant writer, I think.
Okay. Yeah. You sold me.
Yeah.
I got it.
It's gorgeous.
It's been staring me down. Whenever I reshelve books by it in City Lights, I'm just like,
it also is one of my favorite endings of just the last paragraph of that book.
That's going to be one of my fall reads. So what's number 4?
Well, I figured I should do some nonfiction, and I wanted to do some essays, but I decided I thought I would do Dorothy Day's Long Loneliness because The Long Weeping is an homage to her.
Yes, I'm so glad you picked this.
And, part of what's hard about this is so much about a book is when you come to it in your life and what the book was then. You recreate it every time you read it. So what this book and I were when we met, I kind of treasure. I was in my 20s. I was starting volunteer work. I was interested in social service. I was really interested in healing the world in some way. I was also confused about what good writing did in the world. So she was just someone who was endlessly beautiful to me. She was, a writer through and through, but also just someone for whom, I kind of secretly get the Brothers Karamazov in here because it's so much in her work. So Dostoevsky is such an important writer to her and to me. But what I most love about this book is actually the ending, the postscript. And just a few lines from it is because of her insistence that nothing is just theory and nothing is just, you can't rest on your laurels having arrived at a good idea. So she says in this postscript, we were just sitting there talking when Peter Morin came in. We were just sitting there talking when lines of people began to form saying, we need bread. We could not say, go be thou filled. If there were 6 small loaves and a few fishes, we had to divide them. There was always bread. I found myself a barren woman, the joyful mother of children. It is not easy always to be joyful, to keep in mind the duty of delight. The most significant thing about the Catholic worker is poverty, some say. The most significant thing is community, others say. We're not alone anymore. But the final word is love. At times it has been, in the words of Father Zajima, a harsh and dreadful thing. And our very faith and love has been tried through the fire. So it goes on, but it ends with, we have all known the long loneliness, and we have learned that the only solution is love, and that love comes with community. It all happened while we sat there talking, and it is still going on. So, of course, the history of the Catholic workers is itself just amazing, and what they did with the hospitality houses and are still doing. But the concept of the small loaves and the fishes, and like what kind of is a theme from we were talking about earlier, the small lives, the small things you have to give.
As you were reading that, it reminded me of the times you talk or write about the women in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful.
For sure. And women that really informed my whole, being, and I'm so grateful for. And I think there are times I'm, clumsy in putting that forward in my life, but it's still been a guiding force, And that love is a harsh and dreadful thing too. I think, and she was a mother. She was a complicated mother. She's a complicated person, Dorothy Day. But someone who, I feel like knew the power of words and action in cahoots.
Right in line with Simone, too.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
Simone
like
to
very
a
similar,
very extreme degree, but
very similar people in some ways.
I think I admire most the ones who simply cannot live their values, or cannot live without their values.
Mm-hmm.
They can't possibly go against what they believe, and that makes certain people actually seem out of step with most of society. And those are the people I tend to look for, because too often, and I think a lot of writers are, they violate their own rules in this regard. There's a lot of writers who probably aren't ever really living out their values, or at least what they write about. And I always struggle with that when you come into that conflict, in the same way you would when you meet like an athlete or someone that is like, wow, this is way different than
that's
how
true.
you talk.
But I think also something kind of interesting is they're probably always going to contradict themselves too, Like I think one thing about like Dorothy Day's fascinating because she had no room for the feminist movement. But look at her as a woman working in the world, within the patriarchy of the church. And Simone Weil too, like Anne Carson has this beautiful book, Decreation, that I'll just toss it in there. Look how I just sliding all kinds of stuff in here under my six.
Everyone does it.
But the title essay of that is she's talking about Sappho, Simone Weil, and Marguerite Porete, one of the Beguine mystics, and all of them write about self-annihilation. And I love teaching this essay because, she makes this beautiful point, like they have huge selves, they are women who have this corpus of writing, and yet they're talking about the decreation of the self.
That's a good point.
So that's a huge, and that's true for Dorothy Day too. Like there is this effacement of the self, but yet the shining self that's there. So I just love that these women are just examples of it's just uncomfortable, of how they're living in the world. And there is no, you can't pin it down to particular political line or a specific reductive way to define them. They're slippery.
I remember talking about this with Elaine McMillan Sheldon after she made King Cole. And her grandfather plays a big part in that film. Yeah. And how he is just a confounding person. And, he's getting close to 100. And so his whole life is full of contradictions, but that's what she most loves. It's because how could you be honest and not full of those?
Maybe it's partly why she's an artist. I mean, I think that cognitive dissonance is what, I think makes for the friction of the artistic space.
Yeah, because I think that people that are it almost seems like they're too aligned. They're not unsettling at all. I'm like, maybe it's because they've created themselves that way. They're too afraid to be honest enough to contradict. I don't know. I feel like you see this a lot with, and I bring him up all the time because aside from writers and other artists, he's one of my huge models. But Jim Harbaugh, he's a pro-life football coach at a public university. Now he's at the Chargers, obviously. But I couldn't stand that. And yet he invites Colin Kaepernick to be with the team during the spring game and has invited him to be on both his staff at Michigan and at the Chargers. And both of those things piss off completely different extremes of people. And his whole life is full of those moments. He's good friends with the Obamas and is an advocate for social justice reform. But he's super Catholic and quotes the Bible in the locker room and in his media appearances. So I'm just like, he's such a strange person, but that's what I love about him. It's because so few people can do that. Right. Because most football coaches will get up there and just say the company line. And it's impossible for Jim to do that. He can't. So there's just something
I like
about
this guy.
Yeah. I like writers that are in themselves I think it's uncomfortable to think about their life. Whereas if it feels too comfortable, it's like, well, what's the point in that? It's no fun.
It doesn't challenge.
Yeah, someone actually, I forget who said it, but that Simone was, the life that she lived was eccentric and almost asinine in its integrity. I thought that was a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree, with her not eating at the end of her life when she had TB because she's like, the French don't have, I'm eating the rations. That severity basically was suicidal.
That has no point.
Yeah. So it's not like something I would be like, oh, I'm trying to live like Simone Weil in my life. But that's not why we love writers, because we want to necessarily be like them. I probably do in some regard, but
some of it.
But yeah, I don't want to necessarily follow in her exact footsteps, but to sit with her and be challenged by her.
It's a good thing.
I think is very important.
So what's number 5?
It's really hard. I have this alternative stack, but
I figured this was going to be on it.
Paradise from Toni Morrison, Death in the Family, James Agee for its opening of Knoxville.
Whew, we could do 3 episodes.
Well, this new guy, Roy Jacobson's new to me. He's Norwegian, and he has these 4 Borøy Chronicles, and I do feel like that is that's just more recent in my life. These I've long lived with.
Yeah.
He's kind of new, but I think I think C.D. Wright has to be on there for Deep Step Come Shining and her poetry. I met really young. I think James Harms was my poetry teacher at West Virginia University, and he was like, I think maybe you should read her. And I said, you just changed my life.
Wow.
I mean, her, I don't even remember the exact first book. It had a white cover that he gave me of hers. But this one in particular, Deep Step Come Shining, she is probably the voice I come back to the most just for language and just for, an Arkansas poet, deeply immersed in idiom, super smart. She died not long ago, a few years ago. But here's a sample from this book. And this book this book in particular showed me poems. I think I extrapolated to essays a little bit, like how image is hinge and how all the manifestations of light and blindness in this book and ways that books could kind of hang together, but still be of disparate things.
Yeah.
So this is a section I use with my students sometimes. Early every evening, she sits on the steps of her trailer, the dirt yard raked, caterpillar fording the furrows. Mercy, Louise, if it wasn't hot, hot, hot. Corn light. Eyes drank the color and are refreshed. Images seen but not interpreted. Thanks to her lovely twin trees, the water she drew was cool. cool the water she drank from the pump. So she's just someone whose sentences are so exciting to me, so spoken to me.
Oh, man.
And
yeah, I can see you, like,
you can kind of maybe hear that I'm always probably thinking of her when I'm trying to, even like syntactical creations and repetitions of words and the usefulness of poetic elements in lyric prose.
Also, you have the story of you at the pump.
I do have the story of me at the pump. Yeah, I suppose cool the water she drank from the pump felt very true to me. Since the water pump at my church was very cool. Yeah, that's true. So the images are also very rural, but they're also like, what I love about her is like in one line, corn light, for instance, which is not a word, and she puts it together. But think about that. If you're looking at a field of corn and the light shining through and how green it is, like that's its own kind of light.
You know exactly what it is.
You know exactly what it is. And that eyes drink color and are refreshed. The dirt yard raked. I mean, just that. So she's someone for me who, you know, she's kind of like a parallel to James Agee, who evokes, you know, a whole sense of place with tons of words. I mean, he's actually a very wordy writer and sort of opens up the sacredness of sort of the I within, in that book, the child self, where he starts out, you know, at the time I believed myself to be a child or something, but she does it on the other end of the spectrum, one or two phrases, and you know the whole setting. And maybe it's because I share a rural setting, and so it feels like I can fill in so much of the shading. But
that's true. Also, I love that cover.
Yeah, the cover is really,
oh my gosh,
totally freaky.
Yeah, it's
with hummingbirds.
Very of the season.
It's very spooky, and the book is very spooky. I think C.D. Wright is a very dark writer. I don't always, she's sometimes too cerebral for me. Her book, One Big Self, was another one I almost put on there, where she's doing interviews with tons of inmates in Louisiana prisons.
Ooh.
And she did this huge, beautiful portrait book. You can say why I would be interested in this. Because her friend Deborah Luster, I think her mother was murdered, or there was a crime in her family. And so she wanted to spend time, I think, with inmates. And so she did these beautiful portraits that were defined, like in the details determined by the inmates themselves. And so there's a very expensive produced book. And then there's a smaller book where she did interviews, and she does this whole, it's real vocal, polyphonic, and a lot of the voices of the inmates. And it's a lot about prison reform and critique, but also the regional, you know, the sadness of prisons being in rural places for economic boom. And but it's a remarkable book for how she handles voice. And also in that, like Cornlight, in that book, it's very much like what the face, all the manifestations of the face, and the way, the phrase even, like he got a face on him, you know, like he got older, he has experience. And so within the idiom and all of these philosophical ways that the face means, you know. So I think she's a really beautiful mind, but I mainly go to her when I'm like, I got no language, and then I can kind of hear language again. I love that. You know?
Reliable. That's great.
And I'll end with this one. This is Li Young Lee, which is a real classic of his, Rose. And he's also one of those poets who taught me really young that you can write about the most mundane things and imbue it with the eternal. And so one of my favorites is from Blossoms, and I teach this now in my intermediate class. I do a bunch of hymn poems, so they're, you know, hymns. Sometimes they're overtly called that. My friend Doug Van Gundy has this beautiful hymn to cold smoke. Yeah. Some of them are not necessarily called that. Like this one's called From Blossoms, but it feels like a hymn. And we always talk in class about, you know, what do we think hymns are? And of course, they're always very strictly metered, and they're always toward the divine. And so we kind of think about, Ellen Bass has a poem, What Did I Love?, which is about chicken slaughtering. And it's a different kind of hymn poem because it's overtly not divine. So this is one that I think is one of the favorites that they have. From Blossoms. From Blossoms comes this brown paper bag of peaches we bought from the boy at the bend in the road where we turned toward signs painted peaches. From laden boughs, from hands, from sweet fellowship in the bins, comes nectar at the roadside, succulent peaches we devour, dusty skin and all, comes the familiar dust of summer, dust we eat. Oh, to take what we love inside, to carry within us an orchard, to eat not only the skin but the shade, not only the sugar but the days, to hold the fruit in our hands, adore it, then bite into the round jubilance of peach. There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background, from joy to joy to joy, from wing to wing, from blossom to blossom, to impossible blossom, to sweet impossible blossom. So sonically, that's such a gorgeous poem, but it just goes so deep into like so many things that matter to me about peeling something open again and again, and to see the days within, the peach, and to see a mirror of our own, mortality there. But in some ways that's to embrace our eternality at the same time.
Wow.
In that kind of acceptance. And they really, I think, love it. In some ways, I mean, it's he's a kind of famous poet and one of these almost like popular poets like Mary Oliver. So sometimes I feel like we don't regard them in the same way as we do maybe more technical poets. But I think I think he's brilliant. But I think also he has such a wide appeal like Mary Oliver, I think, because he's really speaking to something that is important on so many levels.
Yeah, I can tell I mean, you have a lot of lines about mortality and living days. What was that line without death in the...
Yeah, that last, it's such an interesting turn in that last stanza because students are always sort of like, he leaves the peach altogether. But I think it's a jump that works.
It totally does.
There are days we live as if death were nowhere in the background. And I mean, I think in some ways, sometimes maybe it's the younger people who are reading it, like the older you get, the more you carry grief in every moment. And so it's almost like the grief isn't as felt for me, I feel it throughout the whole poem, but it's sort of like a surprise if you're not sort of attuned to that there's a ladenness, in that bow. There's a ladenness and a loss that this sort of jubilant poem is carrying.
Yeah.
And I do feel like there's something youthful, in my students that maybe resists that ever-presentness of grief. So they're not reading it the same way. But I think they appreciate it when they see that it's kind of hopeful, that
Totally.
it can coexist. Importantly so, you will be disappointed, you will lose. And what will you do with that? How will you move from blossom to impossible blossom at that time when it's not easy,
This was a heck of a group of books.
Good.
I mean, and
I put them all in the bed for you. And some of them will take a few years, but that's okay.